Go with it. I just
finish my story.
Sure.
That was 1986 that occurred. And in the early 90s, Tom Henderson was handling marketing for Q-Sort. I had, by that time, a commercial version complete with printed manual and everything. And he arranged a radio interview for me over the telephone with the Business Network. And a guy called me up and we talked on air for a while. And then he finally finished. We were talking about Q-Sort. And we finally finished talking about that. And, he went to commercial. And he said I could stay on the line and listen for a while. They were going to have some call-ins. And some guy called in. Turned out to be the same guy who had met me in Colorado Springs and was so impressed with me that he had to call in and say, I know that guy. I met him in Colorado Springs.
I remember walking into a room in Cincinnati. Now, you've never seen me in the old days, and you've never seen me with hair either. Till
I was going to say, you know, this is all new to me.
I'm a Buddhist monk. And I have been since the early 70s. When I moved to St. Louis, I grew hair because down here, having tattoos and an earring and a motorcycle with a shaved head gives the wrong impression right off the bat. Yeah. You see, in Wisconsin it didn't matter, but I wore a black Stetson all the time because I got horses, and I remember walking into the room in Cincinnati, and my hat is on the chair over there. And I'm sitting over here. In fact, I was talking to Ben, and somebody says, "The old frog's around here somewhere." And I'm waiting, you know. They said, "How do you know?" He said, "Well, there's his hat." See, they knew me by my hat, but they didn't know what I looked like. They just knew that I had that black hat, and the guy in the tall guy in the black hat, that was the old frog. That was how you could find him. And I realized that if the hat had gone to the meeting, I could probably have avoided a lot of bloodshed.
Yeah, you could have. Absolutely.
Did you pay much attention to when Boardwatch comes on the scene?
I never subscribed.
Boardwatch magazine.
I purchased an issue or two when it was on the newsstand. It wasn't on the newsstand very long. It was mostly a straight subscription. I never did subscribe.
Okay. There's a FidoCon in 1991 that's held, and it was held in Colorado Springs. And Boardwatch creates one BBS con a year after meeting all those people in that Rogues Gallery picture you saw. And they schedule it for the exact same week in the exact same town as FidoCon. And this concerned some people because it looked like they were piggybacking on Fido's success to say, oh, and while you're in town.
Well, he was.
Well, it wouldn't be the first organization that's pulled off
he was.
Like
the guy that was writing Boardwatch was, he was at Washington, he was at Cincinnati, he was at the Alternate Convention in New Jersey, where we had the first Fidonet Olympics, complete with a hard discus throw event. The guy from New Hampshire won, and but he was promoting the whole notion of these commercial conventions that he was going to. He saw all these people that bought all this hardware, and he saw himself as having been able to found and find the next Comdex, and he was going to be the linchpin of that. You know, and it didn't work out, obviously, but that was where he was at.
Yeah, he's still doing them. I think you're thinking of Phil Becker, because Phil Becker.
No, Phil wasn't.
Phil was Jack. So it was Jack Rickard.
Jack Rickard, that's the name.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because Phil mentioned being Phil was there with Bob Hartman at one of the Fido conventions. That's what he.
He was.
He was.
said
He
that
was
it-
on the East Coast.
Yeah,
Yeah,
he
that
said
was,
it
was New Jersey or Cincinnati.
Right, that's the one he described as an ambush. Like he couldn't even believe what happened. That's what
Yeah.
he said. It was like amazing. It was like everybody. The way he described it was that everybody was primed to scream before the first word.
Right, before they got there.
That was
Before they got
Cincinnati.
there. Yeah.
That was Cincinnati.
The,
I also, by the way, don't want to focus merely on.
Washington was pretty much that way too.
Yeah, Washington was just a warm-up.
well, the Europeans renamed us Fidonet. F-I-G-H-T-O-net. And they, you know,
For once, they were right.
and they were absolutely right. Yeah.
I also, by the way, don't want to have to. I mean, I'm focusing or mentioning the conflicts and the politics because it's very interesting that a program of interconnected, BBSs would cause all of this.
Yeah.
But are there other things where there were real triumphs that you also want to talk about?
Fossil, and I think that was, to me, I thought what these guys did was amazing. And I'll let them go into the details. But and again, it's a shame you can't talk to Randy Bush and because he's the one who actually documented all of that. But once they got done, and I'll let these guys go back and talk about it after. I took the whole thing, packaged it up, and first I did a mailing to all the other bulletin board. I went to the library, researched bulletin board software, found out who all the developers were, found out what all their addresses were, and one of the things I did with the IFNA dollars was did a mailing of that document up to all of these individuals. Then I picked up the phone and started making phone calls. And what surprised me is most of them were very nice, very interested, and I guess it took over a year, but a lot of them were receptive, some of them were uninterested until much, like our BBS. And some of them, their users, pushed them because all of them wanted to be able to send and receive mail, and most of the bulletin board software, didn't have that feature. And again, I think that's probably one of the more important things that these guys implemented. I put it out there, and I know it had a positive effect and is probably still
Fido Opus C-Link serial interface layer.
yes.
Standard.
They wrote the standard. They documented. They wrote it.
And we had to do
published
that.
it. Yeah.
We did it in self-defense because,
You were going commercial.
yeah, TJ had the Fidonet interface that ran and then pulled up Fido for when it was a bulletin board, and then ran back to the net. Okay. Then CDOG came, which handled mail a lot better and smoother,
Right.
and also ran Fido.
And the big asset for CDOG was the fact that it did streaming protocols. At 1200 baud, whether you stream or not, and over landlines, whether you stream or not is irrelevant. You don't save much. But at 9600 baud or higher, when, especially if you're on a satellite link, when every block has to be ACT before the next block can be sent, running at 9600 baud doesn't gain you anything. And the streaming protocols can have 8 or 10 blocks out there before the ACTs start coming back.
It even made a difference over a good 2400 baud connection, which is where the make breakpoint started to be. So then CDOG ran, and CDOG went fine until two things happened. Win Wagner decided that he was going to write a better bulletin board system than TJ and created Opus. And Bob Hartman and Vince Periello decided that they were going to come up with a better interface than Tom Henderson, mostly because they hated Tom. And it was strictly a matter that they didn't have to write it. They just really hated Tom, and anything that Tom had done, they were going to find a way to. So they created Binkley.
Binkley term. Yeah.
And Binkley was to take the place of CDOG for those systems that didn't want to run the tainted stuff. Okay, but Binkley started to add little features and wrinkles. And Opus started to run little features and wrinkles, so that
And CDOG had features and wrinkles.
And so for a while, okay, there was a case where if you were running Opus and Binkley, you weren't going to talk well to a standard out-of-the-box Fidonet system. So we sat down, Ben and I and Tom and Randy Bush and some others, and decided that the way TJ put the package together, for good or for bad, was going to be the base standard. It was going to be the base standard. It was Fidonet by DAM, and the way he wrote it, that's the way it was going to be.
I never really understood all this, so this is fascinating.
You had to support that as a default.
Right.
So that any Fido can talk to you.
Right.
Now, you could use bells and whistles all you want, but that had to be negotiated between the systems. You had to start out with the basic protocol.
Exactly. And that was the basis, the foundation for the Fido. And Tom Henderson, he rolled over like that and got CDOG to handle all of the features that were standard and then some. And documented the others. Documented the others, including state diagrams, so that anybody that wanted to use his features could do so. Obviously, he hadn't learned from publishing the code for ARC.
Yeah.
Then the wars broke out. Why do we have to be like that? Well, you can't be in the node list unless you're compatible. And that's when I became the standards Nazi. Essentially, if you want to be in the node list, you have to show compatibility. And I would call these node lists up from my company. I'd call these nodes up, and I would attempt the protocols. And if they weren't answering the phone, we redlined them. Okay, they had to answer following the standard protocol suite. And we had it published. It was there for anybody to use. Anybody that wanted to implement it could do so.
Called them up with an out-of-the-box Fido?
Yeah. I had one set up just to do that. It was the only reason I ever ran out of the box Fido. But we had to have that standard because the net was falling apart in the technical backlash of personal failures to communicate, personal animus.
That was the beginning of the standard, the standard suite.
Yeah.
The technical standard suite.
Right.
Is that, you mean FSC 01, 02?
Yeah, and on and on. Hell, it went well into the 30s before I dropped out.
Yeah,
I expect it went a lot further than that.
Well, there's
I'm sure it does things today I wouldn't recognize.
Well, that's the thing. This is the only one I have a guy who's currently the region coordinator for the South, 4 or 5 states in the Southeast, Texas, Louisiana, whatever that group is, and he mentioned something 4, like there's like 1, 2, 3, and 4, and I've forgotten what it is. Damn, I wanted to ask you this because it's like the main source of all the problems right now that are the politics to the present day is this one standards document that dictates behavior to some extent.
I wrote it.
FTSC 004?
Probably.
That's it. He says if it wasn't for document 4, 90% of the battles that I see wouldn't happen.
Yeah, behavior things in 4 and technical document.
But they were absolutely necessary if we were going to continue to be Fidonet.
Right.
You know, if you were going to have something that wasn't and even Alternet, when we started Alternet, we said that we would adopt as a whole and maintain as a whole the current standards for Fidonet and whatever they matured to, so that we were never going to be in the position of saying our system is better. We wanted to remain completely compatible regardless. Okay? And that was the whole deal. If you're not compatible, it's no longer a network. You're back to single node systems. You know, and
some of them ran 2 networks on a day, right? They ran Fido during mail time, and they ran some other thing the rest of the day.
Yeah, there's actually a very large amount of those.
Yeah.
One of the more famous ones is Nirvana Net, which is a group of 5 systems in California that traded in text files, and they used Fidonet. They were Fidonet nodes to each other, and they would transfer all their... As a result, they had this kind of critical mass of text files. They were one of the largest collections of text files because every night they would sync each other up and give each other more files.
Oh, yeah, that's
So there's 5 of them in that node, and there's like a whole bunch. There's like CandyNet, AdultNet, LawyerNet. I mean, there's like all these little nets that pop up that are Fidonets run.
I knew that making MakeNL was going to cost you dearly, Ben.
But I mean, I've been collecting them, these little tiny nets that people were very proud of, and they think of their own little. And I talked to Tom about this. And
PornoNet?
Yeah, AdultNet. One was
AdultNet?
just adult chat.
MakeNL was, I'm rather proud of that.
Yeah,
it was a script-driven program. It could be set up to be run by a single node so that he could make changes to his entry and check them against the program and make sure they're correct. And it could recognize the change and automatically send it to the host. A network host could run it to collect entries from all the nodes, which may or may not be sent by MakeNL, and build them into a cohesive net list, which he would then automatically forward on Thursdays to
whoever his upstream was.
The regional host. And then he would collect all of the net and add his own stuff. And MakeNL did this all automatically. As a file came in, he'd recognize it from the file name and put it in a special directory. And as he did it, he checked it for errors. Whenever he found an error, he created a message back to whoever sent the file to him, telling him about the error and giving him a snapshot of what that entry was. That was a fairly complex program, and it took me a while to get it put together and working right, but I'm rather proud of that one.
Well, and you should be, but it also created a situation where somebody read the doc file, okay, they could say, okay, I'm going to set up my own network, and they could make themselves the very top node, and that's how all these smaller nets that you see are born.
It was designed that way, and in fact, back in the early days when we were still hand editing the node list, we recognized the existence of private nets with perhaps one node with an entry in the node list, and that node would handle feeding messages through.
Well, I know at least 2 Fortune 100 companies at the time that were involved in that, strictly for their own inter-office mail. Because I helped set them up.
Yeah, I was asking Tom.
Which Tom?
Tom Jennings. I haven't talked to Tom Henderson yet.
Okay.
I've only talked to him by email.
All right.
I haven't even gotten on a phone with him.
It's always been important for us to know. That's why we call Tom Jennings TJ, because there's Tom and then there's Tom. And believe me, East Coast and West Coast sometimes we're not far enough apart.
Well, one is
if you're talking about Jennings, kind of get in the habit of calling him TJ, and then we know exactly who you're talking about.
Well, one's a TOM, the other's a THOM.
Right. Well, TJ.
But they're pronounced the same.
Wow.
When I was talking to TJ, one of the things
we can't see the spelling when you're talking.
You're correct. It's silent.
When he, I was trying to describe the current event to him. The current, this as an example, the current one where the Canadians want to split off Zone 1A because they said that Zone 1 sucks and doesn't understand the Canadians' needs. But what interested me was that
Europe wanting to split off. Remember that?
They basically, they went off on a couple different things about that. But one theme which I really picked up was, Tom would have wanted it this way. In other words, there was this real portrayal of him as an almost, messianic figure, and this, you better repent, Tom's going to come back, and he's going to agree with us. And I just never bring that up with Tom, and his immediate first reaction was that, which is really funny on film. But then he said, but you know what, they're right. They should be able to split off their own Fidonet and do whatever the heck they want and go do their own thing. And
He did a lot to promote that messianic image. Now, you're talking to him, and this is 20 years later, okay? And we've all hopefully grown up a little bit or changed in a number of ways, but there was no stronger supporter of the messianic image of TJ than TJ.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely chaos.
It was like, yeah, I'm saying this. Let's hear the applause from the wings. That's what I'm saying. And Lord love him. He deserves kudos for what he did. There's no question about it. And I like the guy. I'd even sit down and eat a friendly dinner with him.
We did. Nora and I had Thanksgiving dinner with him.
Well, but
in '84.
But the image of him as the rebel against the establishment, okay, became part of the subculture of Fidonet in such a way that it lent to the destruction of Fidonet. If there hadn't been so much, well, this is the way TJ would have wanted it, the Flame Wars and the wars against Henderson, all of those other things, these people that destroyed Fidonet and IFNA did so under the guise of supporting TJ's dream.
I think I'm going to argue with you a little bit, Ryugen, when you say that TJ was the biggest supporter of the Messianic image. I think Randy Bush was. Randy Bush was the one who exalted TJ and placed him on the pedestal. And
okay, yeah, and I won't argue, but Randy didn't say a lot about it.
I'll grant you, TJ liked the idea and he promoted the idea. But
and he put it in words.
The big promoter. Yeah, the big promoter was Randy.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
And Randy was in charge of the FTSC.
Initially, yep.
Yeah, Tom gives a lot of credence to Randy because he, uses his. He had some previous skills that lent well to making FTSCs readable.
He did marvelous beginning work in FTSC, and we wouldn't have had an FTSC if it wasn't for the work that he did.
He was the documenter. He put it all down and made it readable and
I picked that part of it up when I took over that job. But when I took over the job, instead of being 90% technical and 10% political, it became at least 50-50. And at that time, I coined a rule that is still found on my webpage, if you look at it, the Big 5-0, which says, the technology is easy, it's the politics that's hard.
Yeah.
And Fidonet created that rule. The technology is easy, it's the politics that's hard.
It's not a rule, it's a maxim. But
the technology was easy.
Yeah.
It really was.
Yeah, that's like the T-shirt they have with the OSI layer with all the different sockets, and you can actually buy ones that have the additional political layer on top. They take into an extra layer. So it's the technical and then politics.
Politics.
Oh, yeah.
Let me think.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, that's, But it's one of those things, you walk around with that shirt, about 9 people get it, for all the times that you wear the shirt.
I'll buy one.
Fido, was there any point in Fido's growth that really surprised you? And by that I mean beyond, after the growth, gee, we're busting at the seams on this small node ability because the memory constraints and stuff. Is there a number that hits while you're involved with Fido that really surprises you, like 10,000 or 50,000 or anything like that? Is there anything where you were like, wow, that didn't go by?
The growth never ceased to surprise me. On reflection, it seems like we were going up 4 times a year, on average. We went from 25 to 250 the first year, which was 10 times growth. After that, we went from 250 to 1,000 in a year. We went from 1,000 to 4,000 in about a year, and I lost track after that.
Yeah.
What always amazed me was, yes, we had attrition, but it wasn't near as high as I thought it was going to be for what you had to do to maintain a board, keep it up, and keep it rolling. I mean, the people who got involved with Fidonet were dedicated and really interested in if they if they put the effort into setting it up, they wanted to keep it going.
Yeah,
I think that's the reason I burned out so early is I am not and never really was a bulletin board sysop. Running a sysop is all some of these people want to do, and they live for that. And they run marvelous bulletin boards, some of them. I wasn't into that, and I had difficulty maintaining one file area, and I actually had 10 to keep track of. What I was into was the technology. The creation of technology, the advancement of technology. That's where I got off. And as long as I was able to do that, I was able to stay with it. And when that started to wear out or slip away or whatever it did, I began to burn out. But I never really was a bulletin board operator as such. I operated 2 or 3 of them from time to time. Catch as catch can. I even ran Kitten on my home system for a while.
I remember that. Mine was 50-50. And again, my board became the source to find reliable node lists, reliable copies of Fido, reliable copies of all the software, because people knew who I was. But I also ran, I always ran on a deck Rainbow, so I had some unique areas that didn't exist all over the place. I had a lot of Rainbow software, and I ran some EchoMail areas, but I didn't spend a whole lot of time maintaining the board. And you really did have to get out there and clean it up. And I mean, there was no software that went in there and cleaned up all the obnoxiousness and stuff. And it took a lot of time, and people demanded and wanted to be responded to. And I was never very good at that. And I think both these guys were much better nationwide at responding to some of the emails and some of the obnoxious messages. My preference was just to I wanted to maintain the node list. I wanted to take care of the sysops, the regional coordinators, try to keep things going in the organization, and not I didn't spend a whole lot of time trying to reply to every Tom, Dick, and Harry that called me a name.
Yeah, my take on it was a bit different from either of them. I started out running a bulletin board in the evenings on a work system because, after all, the computer's sitting there doing nothing, it might as well do something. And got involved in the back door. I was in the computer business and believed in the computer industry in the early days because I always told myself that some of the software, some of these systems were going to make a difference in somebody's life. If we did our jobs right, people who understood the technology and we shared it, we taught it to others, and we made the technology as available as we could to people at a fair price, then that somehow this was going to, become, and I hate to say the term magical, but it was perhaps magical thinking. That some kid in Dubuque who was going to end up being a farmer would instead write a program on some of the stuff that we created or made available that was going to change how people lived and how people thought, And my take on it really was that, which is why I was so tickled at what you said about Kosovo and so forth. My take on it really was that hopefully that we would have reached some kind of technical critical mass and really do make a contribution to the betterment of mankind. And which is why I was willing to fight the flame wars and keep putting the flames out day after day after day, because I thought if we just persisted long enough, it would take off. We'd reach critical mass, and some kid somewhere, maybe South Africa, or because of the mail thing and the other things, would get something that he would not have gotten had we not kept these systems running. And from that, everybody would benefit. And that was, to me, and when it became clear to me that I didn't have the energy anymore to keep pushing that rock up the hill, I just left, But that was my reason for. I still sign, and if you go to any of the corporations that I work for, and you go into log in to their domains, if you type in the word sysop, it'll ask you for a password, and I can tell you what it is.
I bet I could guess.
You might be able to guess.
Probably sysop.
No.
You don't have to put that on tape.
No.
No.
And it isn't sysop.
Yeah. One of the things I think you'll hear this with Ben, when we let Fidonet go, we made sure that whoever we handed it off to was someone who was going to keep it going. So I know, when I walked away from it, I knew that, maybe these guys weren't going to keep it flying for as long as I did, but the people who, they had all the tools and they kept it going and they were doing a good job. And when we left, and I don't even remember who took it. I guess you had it for a while, and then
I
what's
had
his
it
name
for
out in
a year or
Phoenix.
more, and then the guy down in Arizona.
In Arizona,
I talked him into taking it, and that was a big mistake, as it turned out.
Yeah, he suffered through it for a while, but it kept going. To this day, it never died.
And then the guy up in central Pennsylvania somewhere. He was the last I see, I remember.
But at least to me, I thought it was important to give it a chance. But Ben had all the tools, so we didn't need to be involved anymore.
Is it a surprise to know there's a few thousand Fidonet nodes left?
Oh yeah, I was shocked.
I didn't realize it was that many. I got the impression from a mailing on Yumcha recently from his name is slipped. I'm getting old.
Really?
Shinky.
Yeah, Carl.
Yeah.
But he still had one up.
He posted a message just recently, a long one, telling what he's been up to. An interesting one. But he talked about finally giving up the reins of the IC job to somebody, and he mentioned something about 3 or 4 nodes, and I said, "Gee."
Well,
gee.
But the vast majority of them are in other countries.
They're in Africa, they're in Asia, they're in the amazing thing, what we did over here, our phone system is top-notch over here as compared to what they got over there. And they don't have high speed and a lot of what we got there. So they're still, many of them, that's the only way they can communicate. And for that, I feel good. I feel like we did something for all those people that wouldn't have another solution.
Right. Yeah, it just requires a phone system. And and the thing is when I talk to people about this, how they run software like this.
You know, the telephone company knew we were there. Came the mail hour, they could see us.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
The usage would jump up, come the mail hour, and then drop off again.
And they also knew me. I worked for Western Electric. I mean, they knew exactly what I was doing. I knew some of those guys. They were running systems themselves.
Yeah.
They loved it.
Yeah. What was I going to say? I mean, there aren't many American. There's a controversy that rises up relatively, like in the 90s about whether or not to allow Fidonet over the internet, because and the thinking is, what if the internet goes down, then we're screwed. But because then they're like, well, you're not really. This is one of the things I have to deal with in a general sense. Is some people are like, it's not a BBS unless there's a phone on a modem, connected to it. If it's just a telnet, it's not really a BBS.
Yeah.
That's an interesting argument. But one of the things that does
It's
happen.
a URL. It's a URL.
Well, no, it's a telnet. I guess it's telnet : / but it's a telnetable BBS, not a web BBS. Although I guess they have those too. Hooked in with Fido, because I mean Fido becomes a really good way to ensure, who was I talking to last night? I was talking to somebody recently, and they were talking about how your system would go from being like kind of boring and everything else, and suddenly you had 500 echoes, and suddenly your joint was hopping too. You'd have all these echoes popping in.
Right.
Echo mail is the beginning of blogging. It is.
I like to think it's Jerry Fennell's column in Byte, which is the ultimate blog.
I was at Comdex a couple years ago, and I saw him, and he was almost sober. And I was with a colleague there, and I said, "That's the eminent Dr. Purnell, who has written some of the finest science fiction ever written. Most of it appearing in the columns of Byte." And he was right with me, listening.
Editorial columns of Byte.
He was listening to me until that about the columns of Byte thing, and then suddenly I was in the wrong room.
In the editorial columns of Byte.
That sounds like my father met Isaac Asimov, and they'd hired Isaac Asimov to speak. It was one of these things, give him $10,000, he speaks, and then he hangs out at the dinner afterwards.
Yeah.
And
Drinks.
And my father met him, and he said, "So I heard you had a smarter brother." That was all he had to say to him. Because apparently it was true. Apparently he had a brother who was a real doctorate super candidate or whatever. But I was like, "Dad, Isaac Asimov, you moron."
Well, over half of Dr. Ike's books, you're not going to find in the normal nonfiction section.
Right. Yeah. All right, well, let me, like I said, are there any other, I always ask this of people, are there any other aspects of Fidonet that I haven't asked you about that you really wanted to make sure people knew about? Or, it could be either people or events or technical achievement or, the politics are really cool, on a purely studying basis.
That's what overwhelmed us.
Yeah, the politics.
Yeah, I think that's what knocked us out.
The politics killed us.
Yeah.
I think if it wasn't for politics, we'd have all been at it another 5 years anyway. We'd have created an internet and phone-based version, because that was something that we were talking about. But just who wants to fight?
We'd already made some progress in that direction, or Hartman had anyway, by building a bridge from Fidonet into originally Usenet, and then into Internet. But all you had to do was send them a message, and there was a special thing that you put in your first line to indicate addressing on the net, and he'd pass it over and send it on.
Yeah, there's a couple things like that. There's actually still postings on Usenet from Fidonet. It's fidonet.co.za or something.
Yeah.
Comes in from there. A lot of that. That's what one of the things that's really funny would be with Fidonet, like I said, I talked to different people, and for you, Fidonet peaks probably sometime in the 80s, and for other people it's 1999, and for some people it's like never peaked.
One of the
Still
things
coming up.
One of the things that always irked me, when he applied for the URL for Fidonet, he set it up as fidonet.com, which was inappropriate. .com says commercial, and Fidonet never was commercial.
Should have been fidonet.net or .org,
Yeah.
depending.
Somebody got .org, and there was a huge cranky battle about that too. And there was a huge cranky battle about Russia because Russia had modified, the Russians had modified the documents where, of course, where it said, trademark by Tom Jennings, they would under, not that it matters here, and things like that. so they would have these...
That must have drove him crazy if he knew about it.
The whole dog with diskette thing,
Yeah.
again, just that whole, you have it's such a, because one of the things that really strikes me also about Fidonet is much, in many ways, like the Boy Scouts. Everyone remembers...
It's a social disease.
Yeah.
It is absolutely.
God, I never heard it said that way before, but you're right.
I mean, some of the best friends I've had for the longest times, I still have friends coast to coast.
And
almost
enemies.
Yeah.
Well, and people who still remember me and, as...
In various
Ifna.
ways, yeah.
Yeah. Ifna, the Ifna destroyer. But, there were many cities that I had an opportunity to travel to, and friends that I still see socially after all these years, and none of it is related to Fidonet today, whereas back then it all was.
Yeah, I didn't even think to ask that about the fact that, you guys did run BBSs, but that, for you it was secondary. It ended up being secondary.
Yeah.
I know the name Baker's Acre, but I didn't log on it because I was 15. But
And the old Frog Swamp.
And mine was PC Lug.
Yeah.
The first.
That's one of the things I talk about is that, in the beginning, way in the beginning, like from 78 to 81, the vast majority of BBSs, their names are the type of software they're running dash what town they're in.
Right.
It's very odd. And then after a while, it becomes the treasure chest. My all-time favorite name is the enchanted toilet. I've got like thousands of these wacky names where it's just like, Chips Ahoy and everything else. And to me, that really...
Take your favorite BBS name and type it in on the internet, and it's probably still out there.
Well, it's definitely on one of my lists. I mean, I collect all these lists of these names, and I guess it's just a switch from the real technical guys, right, who they get in on it, and they're like, software name dash whatever, that's quite sufficient. ABBS Chicago, or dial your match number 15. And then by around 82, 83, when they start having modems coming in for Christmas, people put up their board. Now it's the fun, fruity, happy-go-lucky stickers on the side BBS that, and it's a different group of people, and they don't agree with the technical people who are using them to trade computer information. So it's an interesting...
Have you ever gone to Chicago and talked to Ward?
Yes. Yes, I went to Chicago, talked to Ward. Ward gave me roles from the first 3 or 4 months of the BBS that I've been typing in, so I'm transcribing these messages that were written in 78. And it took 2 years, but I got to talk to Randy this trip.
Cool.
So,
Randy's got a lot to say about Ward, too.
Randy Bush?
No.
Randy Seuss.
Randy
Oh,
Seuss.
Randy Seuss. He told me a great story about the gun and the paper. He was with... It captures him perfectly. He said he was in the basement or something.
He's the one who wrote X Modem, isn't he?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And together they made the first dial-up BBS, CBBS. Yep. And they had a stack of paper that had been a printout. And Ward was like, we should have done it with the hold paper. We need to put it into a binder. And Randy whipped out his gun and went, bam, bam, bam. Like, it's ready. And that, Ward didn't come and visit for, days. This is from Randy. This is Randy's story.
Yeah.
Bam, bam. that they had this completely different take on things, and Randy has a completely different. He's got all these different. And again, it took 2 years and a lot of hand holding to get him to talk about it, because he doesn't.
No.
You know, whether or not he's putting up a front or not, he really puts on it. It's kind of like he
Well,
worked on it hardware-wise.
Ward Christensen?
Yeah.
No, not Ward. Ward will talk about it quite happily today.
Ward got really ripped, though. You have to understand, Ward was working for IBM on their mainframes.
Still is.
When they got into these, is he still with them?
He's still at that job now. He sells different things. Yeah.
When they started doing PCs, they never talked to him. The one time IBM acknowledged that he knew anything about PCs, they took him to Chicago Comdex, and they had him trying to get hell, what's the name of the operating system that didn't work? IBM.
OS2.
OS2. They were trying to get an OS2 communications program working. Now IBM, OS2 was really nifty stuff. The core of it was really good. The problem is that when IBM went to finish the development, they had fired all of the staff of the people that were doing the hardware drivers for everything in the world. So they had an operating system with no driver. It wouldn't talk to anything. It didn't know how to talk to anything.
Yeah.
And they were trying to get this thing to run. They had this big demo, and they brought Ward in to try and get this communications thing working. And he spent 6 hours trying to get X modem to run on OS2 and couldn't. And I said, this is the guy that invented X modem, and he can't get it to run. How are they going to sell this shit?
They didn't.
Yeah, I mean,
Absolutely did not.
when I asked Ward, Ward mentioned to me his only 2 regrets. Was one, he did not have an entrepreneurial spirit in him, so he never made any money on it. He doesn't regret he doesn't make the money. He just regrets that he just wasn't kind of the person who would make the money.
Yeah.
And his other one was that he used checksums instead of CRC with X modem.
Yeah.
That he thought that was the biggest mistake he ever made, especially
Actually,
considering.
X modem used CRCs. He wrote Modem 7, which
Right.
used checksums.
Right.
And and I was involved with the 1K X modem algorithm. Me and a guy in California who ran a little board down there.
That was somebody's clues. That wasn't Christensen's.
No, but that was the new one, because the
Of
first
course,
one
he
was
published the sources. Anybody could write.
the first one was
clue.
block by block. Kim somebody down in Los Angeles Hollywood board, and Kim Levitt and I put together the algorithm for the 1K block CRC routines
Okay.
that later became Z modem.
Ah.
Chuck Forsberg Z modem?
That later became Z modem.
Well, I've already interviewed Chuck, so I can't go back on that one. But yeah, what
See, in those days, nobody really cared. Now, Chuck was one of the first guys that started to think about making money from this stuff. But in those, I wrote...
Now, Vern Berg was one of the first to start thinking about making money.
Oh, yeah, Vern's... But
But he wasn't Fidonet. He had a board on Fidonet, but he wasn't Fidonet.
Right. In the early days, particularly in the early CPM days, when we were doing this stuff, I started out, my first computer was an NEC, CPM system. And I wanted to put a bulletin board up on it, which meant I had to run RCPM. And it used a different SIO chip, 8251, which is a much better chip than the 8250, and it's what IBM should have used, but never mind. And NEC had been trying to get, their programmers in-house had been trying to get the BI program. I don't know if you know about BI or not. Trying to get BI to run on the system for about 8 months. And they were unable. They'd been working on this thing, got 2 programs on it full time. I didn't know any better. So I sat down and I knocked it out in about a week. And then I published it. And the next thing I know, NEC is calling me up and saying, could they republish the source? Well, sure, of course. And that ended up with them having me start an NEC users group. And they sent me the name of everybody in the country that had bought an NEC computer to start this users group. They sent me their complete registration lists. And that was the beginning of my business.
Interesting.
But we all wrote the stuff and gave it away.
Right.
I mean, that was how it worked in those days.
And back in the, it was chilling.
Yeah, and as time settles, what ends up happening is someone's name gets attached to it, and that's what I end up with.
Oh, yeah.
You know, I mean, that's the thing, and that's what I find a lot of, a lot of source code that ends up coming. Before this documentary started, I had no idea that our BBS predated the PC. Now, of course, I know better. And not only that, but I mean, I've actually gotten my hands on the code from.
It ran on CPM.
Right, and it was by someone, Howard Moulton or something like that, and it has like 10 other fathers. And
Yes, I was going to say, that's not one of the 5 names I'd have recognized.
Right, and then there's the interview I did, that I just did yesterday before driving down here, was Lauren Jones, who was out of first Fargo, North Dakota, and then somewhere else equally remote, and then something, and he ended up being the guy who, at PC Blue, who took stuff from the East Coast and the West Coast and reconciled that this was from like 83 till about 93. And see, 83, it's already an old dog that's been around the block for half a decade or more. You know, that's the thing that's amazing to me. I didn't know this until I talked to the guy who ran the first BBS in Australia, and he was showing me this ancient system, and it had this version of our BBS with like dates on it, like, modified for this use in 80 and 81, and I was like, that makes no sense. You know, it's like finding a picture of a Tebow carved into a cave. You're just like, what? I had no idea. There's a lot of, and that's the thing. There's a lot of buried history. No, and I don't just mean skeletons. I mean, actual, facts which are just gone. And that's why I did this.
When you do your Australian trip, I got a bunch of names for you.
I am not going. I am intentionally not doing anything much out of North America. I interviewed one guy from Australia because he lived here, and one guy from Mexico, and I want to interview a guy from India, I think. But I think their stories upon themselves that I couldn't even hope to plunge the depths of. So I'm hoping that they'll get really ticked off that I just focused on North America and do their own, in their own native language, in their own, thing, because I couldn't hope to do it. I mean, I started to get told a little bit about this. I mean, in Australia, modems don't become legal until 1981. And they become legal because this guy, Trevor Marshall, who creates a modem and gets it published, like the schematics for it, gets published in like an Australian version of Popular Electronics. Suddenly all these modems are coming up and they legislate in, okay, modems can come in. And, a lot of the countries have that problem. Like it's not, modems aren't legal in India until 1992 because they amend the Telegraph Act of 1845 to allow, it was like the British Telegraph Act in India to allow modems that you can hook up these third parties. So and I'm like, there's no way I can hope to get these. I mean, I'm being exotic enough having as many Canadians as I have in this thing.
QBBS was a Canadian project initially.
Which one?
QBBS?
Yeah.
Was a very good system.
There's a few that are like that out of there that I interviewed. Pyroto Mountain, which is definitely something that postdates all you guys. It's like a very popular thing, so it's like Pyroto Mountain. And the Punter protocol is on the Commodore. And it's basically that this guy sat down and tried to fix all the flaws in X modem to work with Commodores, and it used like the Commodore sector size, which was different and stuff. Anyway, more useless trivia. Tom told me one of his big pits of pride was how fast his transfer stuff was, but that he made the mistake of being accurate and said that, he included the overhead and everything else and other people weren't including the overhead. And he mentioned specifically WIN's transfer protocol sent 8K blocks, and that great as long as there was nothing wrong with the block. And then you were screwed. But, theoretically, it went really fast. Anyway.
Yeah, what he did was simply increase the block size so that the gap for the ACK and turnaround was essentially the same as it was for the 128K block, but it was for a huge block. And that, of course, speeded it up. But if you had an error, you had to retransmit that whole huge block again.
The reason, if you're down in Dallas and you're just going across town in Dallas, you can do that. But God help you if you have to send Irvine
So with this tape running out, like I said, I figured the 1 more hour was going to kill you. So if there was any
You
other...
only have 1 hour on the tape?
1 hour per tape, yeah.
You need to use longer checksums.
Yeah. Well, it's 1 hour per tape. It runs up to about 13 gigabytes of data. 720 by 480 digitized image. And that's what I load into my
This
machine.
is a digital system?
Yes.
Uh-huh.
Cool.
Loading digital stuff onto tape. And then I take it and I knock it to a 13 gigabyte file, and then I knock that 1 hour down to anywhere between the record was a 1 hour interview that went down to, I think it was like 45 seconds or something like that.
Good heavens.
It's quite an interview.
Now that's editing.
Yeah.
Yeah, well,
he
That's serious editing.
you know, he gave me a big bucket of nothing, and I did my best to run with it. I mean, the problem is also...
after compression, 480 I television is approximately a gigabyte per hour.
Mhm. Yeah.
So
Yeah, no, this is...
in a digital system where the background never changes, it's just there, and the only thing that's changing much are the faces of the people.
Right.
You ought to be able to compress the hell out of that.
Yeah, no, it definitely does tend to do that. I mean, my DVD guy who's giving me lots of advice is like very pleased that I have lots of shots in which nothing happens.
Well, here's something that you need to have on the record,
Yes.
just for reference's sake. Between Ken holding it together and Benjamin and I working through Fossil and Tom Henderson working with ARC, okay, which we know became Zip, okay, and we were instrumental in helping to tune ARC, because ARC didn't always work good. It went through a number of versions, and we all played with the source code for ARC, and Tom will acknowledge that.
Zip.
Okay, when ARC finally matured at 5.21 rather, which was the last of the published versions, I think, before he went commercial with it, or tried to, that was the format that was encapsulated into Zip, and that was encapsulated